The Dallas Cowboys have many questions to answer because after a 44-19 game in which they lost to the New Orleans Saints, there has been a lot of chatter regarding this Cowboys team. So in today's video, I want to discuss the Saints game as well as what is going to happen next for the Dallas Cowboys. So as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about the Dallas Cowboys. The way the video is going to go down is we're going to start off by talking about the game. We're going to go over what happened in the game and break down some of the statistics that we saw in this game. Then we're going to talk about some offensive issues with the Dallas Cowboys. Then we're going to go to a bit more of the juicy stuff with the defensive issues. And then at the very end of the video, I have 3 different ways that I think the future for the Dallas Cowboys is going to go. But with that all said, if you do go on to enjoy today's video, hit the like and subscribe button. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers. But with that said, let's hop into the video. So as I mentioned, we're going to begin by discussing the actual game against the Saints. In case you guys missed it, which none of you guys did, but in case you did, the final score was 44-19, and it was a complete routing of the Dallas Cowboys. I want to say that the first 6 drives the Saints have all resulted in touchdowns, with Derek Carr not even really having to pass the ball all that much. On the day, Derek Carr only completed 11 passes out of 16 for 243 yards with 2 touchdowns. But in this game, it was really 2 things that dominated the Dallas Cowboys. It was the deep ball and it was the outside runs. With the deep ball, it was basically all set up through play action and through the fact that they could actually run the ball effectively. Because on the day, Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, and Jamal Williams absolutely feasted on that Cowboys defensive line. Kamara had an average of 5.8 yards per carry with 20 carries. He also had 3 touchdowns running the ball and 1 touchdown receiving the ball. Jamal Williams also had himself a day, basically averaging 5 yards a carry on 8 carries. And it doesn't get any worse for Taysom Hill. He averaged 6 yards per carry. Whereas when you compare that to the Dallas Cowboys only had 68 rushing yards to the 190 that the New Orleans Saints had. The basic game plan that the Saints were running in this game was, if our offensive line can dominate the Dallas Cowboys defensive line, and if they can establish some sort of run game primarily on the outside zone runs, then the Saints offense was going to do whatever they wanted to do against this Cowboys defense. Because at the end of the day, whenever you can establish a run game, whenever you can physically impose your will on your defensive line, it really makes it hard for those other guys to make plays. Everyone's going to want to blame Mike Zimmer, but in this game, it was really the game plan the Saints put together that completely outclassed the players that the Dallas Cowboys have. I'll go into more detail about what I mean by all this when we get to the defensive portion of the video, but I do think that that was a big part for the reason why the Saints dominated in this game. When it comes to the Cowboys side of things with their offense was pretty good for most of the game. It definitely got worse once the lead that the Saints were building kept growing and growing and growing. And sort of the Achilles heel that this Cowboys offense sort of struggled with in this one was not being able to put the ball in the end zone. Basically, every single one of their drives, at least in the first half, they were able to move the ball very effectively, but they weren't actually able to score touchdowns. And in a game when your defense is giving up 44 points, you obviously have to put up touchdowns, so field goals really weren't helping them all that much. So you could put the blame on Dak Prescott, but I think in this specific game, it really wasn't their fault. But that's basically everything you need to know from the game. If you guys want more details about it, I just suggest watching the highlights. It was a complete routing and it was utter domination. But let's start off by kind of keeping the rhythm here by talking about the offensive issues that Dallas has moving forward. Now I'm going to kind of take a bit of a step back here and kind of look back to this most recent offseason where Dallas lost their starting tackle, their starting center, their starting running back, and a lot of other pieces. And in the offseason, they looked to address those positions through the draft. They went in there, they took Tyler Guyton in the first round, they took Cooper Beebe in, I think, the 3rd round. They did not draft a running back to replace Tony Pollard, but they did draft Ryan Flournoy, I think, in the 7th round of last year's draft. The thought process was that you had the pieces to fill in there. You had Rico Dowell, who was going to come in and take a big step forward as your starting running back. And ultimately speaking, through 2 games, and yes, it's a very small sample size, but the run game for Dallas has been basically nowhere. They brought in Ezekiel Elliott to be sort of a change of pace back from Rico Dowell, but unfortunately, neither one of those guys are all that good. And even though the run game didn't cost them this game against New Orleans, it definitely would have been nice if the Cowboys could have ran the ball to sort of take some possessions away from the Saints offense. But because Dallas can't actually effectively run the ball, it's basically all on the shoulders of Dak Prescott to throw the ball, and because they're throwing the ball for big chunk plays, ultimately their defense isn't resting all that much. So you can kind of see why this goes hand in hand. You need a run game to win the time of possession, and whenever you have no run game to work the clock and move the ball down the field, you have to rely on making big chunk plays to CeeDee Lamb, Ferguson, and Brandon Cooks. Which kind of leads me to my next point in this one, which is the Cowboys offense completely lacks any sort of playmakers outside of CeeDee Lamb. Now, I'll say this, in fairness to Dallas, Jake Ferguson is out, so it's not really their fault that he's out. But even when Ferguson is healthy, he's not a playmaker per se. Like, he's not a Travis Kelce type of guy. He's a very typical above average tight end that, yes, can make plays in the passing game. But as I said, he's not a 1,000 yard receiver. He may be lucky to get like 700 or 800 yards. And that's no disrespect to Jake Ferguson. That's just kind of the truth. He isn't a 100 yard per game type of guy. But in this offense, he's going to have to used like that. Because outside of CeeDee Lamb, their number 2 receiver is Brandon Cooks, which in theory and on paper sounds very good until you actually kind of sit down and really think about it, that Brandon Cooks is not the Brandon Cooks that he used to be. He's still a very good player and a very valuable piece to this offense for Dallas, but he doesn't create the separation that he used to. He isn't the deep threat that he used to, and it just doesn't feel like him and Dak have much of a rapport. And if you take away CeeDee Lamb from this receiving core, as I said, you have Brandon Cooks, and then after him, you have Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, and then the rookie Ryan. And I would venture to say that none of those guys are really worthy of being the third receiver. Of those guys, I would say that Tolbert has looked the best, but he also hasn't really been all that impressive. So when you take CeeDee Lamb out of the equation, they don't have any other serious playmakers to get the ball to, and they have no run game. It also doesn't help Dak Prescott that he has a rookie tackle who, give him his credit, has played fairly well, and offensive line that's good, but still it's very young. So you have a young offensive line that isn't playing as good as it used to. You have very limited weapons outside of CeeDee Lamb, and you have no run game. So ultimately, you are completely relying on really 2 pieces for this offense, Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, and I guess Mike McCarthy. So that's an issue, but it's definitely not the bigger issue, because the bigger issue is going to be this defense. Because there is one scheme that can completely tear apart this Cowboys defense, and it's the exact same scheme that I just talked about with this Saints offense. Whenever the Cowboys go up against a team that can actually run the football effectively, specifically to the outside, it's basically over for this Cowboys defense, because their interior defensive line is so god-awful that almost every single time a team wants to physically impose their weight and run the ball, they can do so. Right now, the starters for the defensive line, at least interior-wise for Dallas, is Mazi Smith and Osa Odigizua. And Mazi Smith was a first-round pick from last year who hasn't really panned out that much. And then Osa is a very good pass-rushing defensive tackle, but isn't particularly stout in the run game. And then behind them, you have guys like Justin Rogers, Linval Joseph, and Jordan Phillips. But 2 of those guys are very old and not good anymore, and one of those guys was like a 6th-round rookie. So you're sort of starting to see the point here. The defensive tackles suck, so there's a lot of pressure being put on other position groups like the linebackers and the edge to make up for their terrible performance. And when you actually break down the film of this Saints game, you will find multiple occasions where those defensive tackles are getting either their asses put in the dirt, getting double teamed effectively, and doing absolutely nothing to help their linebackers who are trying to float over the top and make plays. It also doesn't help Dallas that their linebackers aren't really that big and strong. They don't have a Roquan Smith. Eric Kendricks and Overshown and Morris LaFau are smaller, faster guys who aren't really that big and physically imposing. So they don't really shed blocks all that great, which is exactly why teams can run the ball all over Dallas. It doesn't matter that you have 1 healthy, 2 all-pro level corners and an all-pro level pass rusher and DeMarcus Lawrence and great safeties if your interior defensive line is consistently allowing these offensive linemen to get to that second level. Because in a game where Derek Carr only had 11 completions, you gave up 44 points, and I guarantee you other teams are going to learn this scheme and do the exact same thing. So yes, Dallas will be able to probably play very well against bad running teams, but when you run into a team that can actually somewhat run the ball like a Philadelphia or like a Green Bay or like a New Orleans, this is what's going to happen. So that leads me to the last part that I kind of want to finish off here with, and that's, what does Dallas do moving forward? Well, you can obviously try to make some trades, but I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think anyone's going to want to help Dallas fix this issue. So that leads me to 3 potential ways this does go down. Number 1, they actually are able to fix the issue. Now, how would you actually fix the issue? I'm not too sure. It would probably be some sort of scheme change to help the defensive line. Maybe you throw an extra defensive body out there in the box to help them scheme up against the runs. Or maybe the interior defensive linemen actually try and actually make plays. If that's the case, that will definitely help Dallas be a better team defensively. But at the same time, I don't think that's going to happen because ultimately this has been the exact same issue that Dallas has dealt with the past couple years and it hasn't been fixed. Which leads me to my second option, which I think is very realistic, which is the issue doesn't get fixed and teams will be able to run the ball on Dallas very effectively and the weapons on Dallas aren't able to make up for it and they're going to be really bad this year. This would be a very similar scenario to what Philadelphia went through last year where everything was going well and then everything collapsed at the back end. And I can definitely see a world where that would happen to a team like Dallas who can't run the ball effectively, has no playmakers outside of CD, and can't stop the run. To me, it's a recipe for disaster against any sort of good to decent team. So if Dallas can't find a way to fix this issue, it could be a really bad year for Dallas. And then there's the third one, which I think is the most likely route that's going to happen this year for Dallas, which is going to be that this team is going to be the exact same team that we've seen for the last 3 years. They're going to be able to dominate teams that can't run the ball effectively. And when they go up against actually competent teams that are very well ran, the Cowboys are going to lose in pretty typical embarrassing fashion. And more than likely, they'll make the playoffs and probably lose in the first or second round. I hate that I have to bring this conversation up, but it's probably what's going to happen for Dallas. Because they have too much talent and too many good players and too many great all-stars and Pro Bowl level guys to be a bad team. But if they can't get this issue fixed, it's just going to be rinse and repeat for the Dallas Cowboys. And there's a lot of people that you can put the blame on here. You could put the blame on Dak for not having any weapons. You could put the blame on Micah for having a stupid podcast. You could even blame Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer for not coaching their guys up better, but I think you have to put a lot of the blame on Jerry Jones. He is the exact same guy who waited to the very last minute to pay Dak, to pay CD, and now to pay Micah Parsons. And because he waited till last minute, despite Cowboys fans begging for him to get these contracts done earlier so they'd be cheaper, the team isn't going to be as good and isn't going to be able to actually fix their main issues. I'll say this, I think Jerry Jones has put together a very good team, but I think this offseason, his inactivity is going to cost the Cowboys this 2024 season. You've already committed long-term to Dak Prescott, so you're obviously going all in to win now, but you didn't really go all in when you didn't sign any interior defensive linemen or you didn't sign any playmakers and when you drafted a left tackle when you already had a good tackle last year. I'm not saying that I disagree with everything they did this offseason because I've been pretty vocal that I thought they had a decent offseason. But when you ultimately expect major change and don't do anything to actually make the change, this is going to be the result. And as you guys can see, I'm getting attacked by my cat here. All right, buddy, go. So to Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys, I don't know how this is going to play out. It could end up maybe fixing itself out, or it's going to be more of the same, but you guys let me know in the comment section below. And of course, if you went on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll be back soon. I love you guys. Peace.